Welcome everyone, and thank you for participating in the Humane Summit, a virtual speaker series brought to you by the Humane Education Coalition. My name is Megan Moon, and I am the president and founder of the coalition, as well as the producer of the summit. We are very grateful to conclude the summit tonight, or this morning for some of you, with Wind Down with Wellness, a facilitated panel discussion sponsored by the University of Denver's Institute for Human-Animal Connection, with technology support kindly provided by Courtney Brown, Senior Community Project Manager at iHack. Thank you so much. We invite you to settle into a comfortable place, take a few deep breaths, and join us for this relaxing, facilitated discussion. As we all near the end of this event and get back to our important work, we thought it would be important to close the speaker series with a talk about wellness. The future of our planet rests in our hands as educators, and truly taking care of ourselves is a critical but often overlooked element of our lives. Thank you for joining us for this hour-long conversation with leaders in the field of humane education to discuss compassion fatigue and burnout, interpersonal communication, and powerful self-care strategies. Together, we will deepen our understanding of mindfulness, gratitude, and our own self-worth in and out of the classroom. Serving on today's panel are 7 changemakers and thought leaders. We are thrilled to welcome, and give us a wave, please, when I call your name, Dr. Sarah Bexell, Director of Humane Education at the Institute for Human-Animal Connection at the University of Denver. Elischia Fludd, Founder and Executive Director of EOTO World. Magaly Madrid, Classroom Teacher and Founder of EverydayHumane. Deb Matlock, Founder of Wild Rhythms. Rosanna Ng, Environment Program Manager at ADM Capital Foundation. Brian Normoyle, Co-Founder of the Institute for Animal Happiness, and Diane Rose Solomon, Author and Founder of Pets, People, Planet Connection, and Team Kindness. Our panelist, Lisa Forsley, is unfortunately unable to attend our panel discussion due to a family emergency, and we are thinking of her and sending well wishes to her family. So there are just a few functions in Zoom that I'd like to go over very quickly before we get started. For those of you who have attended the previous live panel discussions, you've heard this before. First, we recommend that attendees choose the gallery view option that's in the top right corner of the Zoom screen. And that way you can see all of the panelists at one time. We're all the same size. If you're not already seeing that view, we recommend making the switch to gallery view. We also encourage you to please introduce yourselves in the chat section at the bottom of the screen. Tell us where in the world you are located and what you hope to gain from attending today's live panel discussion. And if you have a question you'd like to ask our panelists, please post it in the Q&A section. There's another little icon at the bottom of your screen called Q&A. We will do our best to share your questions with the panelists in the time that we have available today, and we will continue this conversation in the summit, where a recording of our discussion will be posted later on today. So we'll begin our discussion with a list of questions we have previously collected. First, I just want to ask our panelists if any of you have reading recommendations, books, articles, or other resources that might be helpful to our participants to help them learn more about wellness or self-care or mindfulness. Please add them into that chat thread in the comments section there. We will keep a track of all of the items, all of the articles and resources that are mentioned, and share that list of resources after the session today. So I don't know about all of you here on the panel, but I don't know that any single one of us would claim to be a complete expert in self-care and wellness. I think we are all working very hard to learn and grow, and we can share our experiences today and the lessons learned, especially in humane education, along the way. So that's really the value, I think, of today's live panel discussion. Our first question is about compassion fatigue and burnout specifically. Those are 2 terms we may all already be familiar with, but I'm wondering, Sarah, if you could maybe share a definition for those who are attending. And you are muted.
not very helpful if I'm just a silent talking head, right? Welcome everyone. And really quickly, we just wanted to provide definitions of both of these particular issues. And I'll go through them a little bit slowly so you can think about them. We know that this is, both of these things are things that we probably all have already faced. And if not, if you're new in humane education, there are things to look for to keep yourself feeling healthy and well so that you can continue the great work that you do. So burnout is really a cumulative process marked by emotional exhaustion and withdrawal associated with increased workload and institutional stress. And burnout actually is not trauma related, but due primarily to overwork. And I will list the stages of burnout because these are also things for us to keep in mind. So often we start out with great enthusiasm about the hard work and helping work that we're doing. This can often, though, lead to really a stagnation in our emotional orientation to our work. And then if we're not feeling the level of progress that we're hoping to see in the issue that we are trying to address, we actually go through a stage of frustration. And if that's not alleviated, can even lead to apathy. That's burnout, which is quite different from compassion fatigue. And so I want to share with you sort of the clinical definition of that. And then I wanted to add a few things from my own personal experience. And I think the panel can also add to this definition and thoughts of what is compassion fatigue as well. So compassion fatigue is a state of experience by those helping people or animals in distress. It is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped to the degree that it can create secondary traumatic stress for the helper. So we oftentimes, two things I wanted to add to that, we, just so you know, oftentimes sort of interchange compassion fatigue with vicarious trauma. So literally we are taking on the trauma that we see in those that we are trying to help. And of course, we all know, I think we all know this already, can be extremely painful and cumulatively can cause really serious impacts on both our mental health first, which often then manifests in physical health ramifications. The other thing that I wanted to add to this, and I think that we're realizing this more and more as we hear news or actually visually see the natural environment deteriorate around us, is that this also applies in environmental issues as well, as we see forest destroys, as we see our oceans being polluted. So I think that many of us in humane education can expand that definition out to the impacts that we're seeing on the natural environment that we also hold dear. So that's really just to get us started, and I would love to now be quiet and let other folks add their thoughts and experiences to those definitions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Very helpful. And I appreciate that you included the environment in your description. Yes, Diane.
Thank you so much. I was taking notes because I know that we all experience it, but just to hear it verbalized, it's really, that was really helpful. Thank you, Sarah. You know, what's been bubbling up for me lately is a big shift that I had a couple of years ago in my business, where when I first started out and was first writing books about animal rescue, I named my company Save Our Pets, People, and Planet. And the more I was involved with this idea that like my work, my writing was going to have to save the world and save animals and save the planet, it was like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And I realized that like I was sort of spinning out a little bit because I can't possibly, me singly or even in a group, save everybody. It's just not possible. So I shifted the name of my company to Pets, People, Planet, Connection, because what we can do is we can connect so that we can work together to do the best job that we can do. And just that mind shift, like it just really just taking that word save, off of my shoulders just was a huge lift, and getting into the connection rather than the obligation really just, it made such a difference for me.
That's great. Thank you, Diane. Compassion fatigue and burnout are particularly of concern, I think, as we've noted, for those in the humane field. And we, as educators, we often put in long hours, and it's not always easy to see the results of our work. What does the panel think are recommended strategies for addressing compassion fatigue and burnout in our work, whether that's work in animal advocacy and activism or in humane education in the classroom? Yes, Deb.
One of the things that I do personally is kind of address my own compassion fatigue and when I start to feel burned out, but also to try to preempt it a little bit, is remind myself that I'm doing what I can, but that there's a bigger mystery that I don't always understand or that I can't always interpret. And so, kind of reminding myself to act with what's in front of me and what I'm able to do right then. This dog in front of me right now, or this land area in my neighborhood right now, or this particular organization that I'm connected to right now. Not that that includes the need for a bigger vision, but it kind of helps me personally to be able to take off a bite that I can chew, so to speak, as opposed to getting overwhelmed in the larger, oh my gosh, kind of feeling.
That's great. Yes, Elischia.
Just to piggyback a bit on what Deb was saying, I think it's important in order for us to recognize that a lot of the work that we're doing are things that's for the long term, meaning it's going to take generations before we really start to see the full effects of what it is that we're planting seeds of today. And so I like to visualize things. So I like to do things like a strategic map. I work a lot with youth, helping them figure out the strategies for how to move forward on these really big, challenging issues that we're talking about. And so part of that is being comfortable with the fact that it's going to be a long time, that you may not see the results that you're hoping to see even in your own lifetime. That takes a little bit of the pressure off, but it also keeps a small sense of urgency that's healthy, because you still want to be able to have the urgency that's necessary for these pressing issues without draining yourself and taking yourself out of the context of being helpful. It then can cause things to be more stagnant, which is what you absolutely don't want to do.
Yes, very good point. Yes, Sarah.
I think this is one that is maybe almost too simple, but I think it's really important, is when I start feeling really overwhelmed or really sad, and almost like I'm losing control of my own emotions. What I really try to do is I try to really think about the fact that I have all these amazing colleagues and we're this huge team and we're all working together. And even though we're working on some, seemingly different issues, whether it's protecting other humans or other animals or the natural environment, we all are sort of chipping away at the injustices that we see and we feel out there. And so I just remind myself that we are not alone, and our field keeps growing bigger, and that's really exciting to me. And I'm just going to say this right now, but Megan, thank you for bringing everybody together who has participated in the summit, and now we are all literally colleagues together. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Yes, Brian.
Thank you. I just love listening to all the wisdom in these shares. So a couple things that I do is I remind myself daily of the good choices that I'm making to try to make an impact. And by going vegan, for example, I know by doing that I'm saving countless lives. With the Institute for Animal Happiness and VegFest and the entities that we have, we're making an impact that way. And then also, by going vegan, I'm also reducing significantly my carbon footprint. And I remind myself of that daily. And if I do nothing else but remind myself of that, then I that gives me encouragement and energy to move forward when, quite frankly, I'm fatigued. The second thing I do is I do a daily gratitude list. I do a lot of recovery support in Al-Anon. Al-Anon is a program that supports individuals that come from the disease of alcohol and drugs in their family. And I work with colleges and also high schools in addition to local activity. And the one thing, I mean, people come into those meetings and groups sometimes just wrecked from life. And so by doing a gratitude list, it reminds me daily of the good things in my life. And yes, they're repetitive, but you have to have that repetition in order for it to become habitual. So those are a couple things that I do.
Great. Rosanna, did you have something to contribute?
Yes. First of all, I like to say that my line of work is a little bit different. I'm not in the education arena anymore. I used to be. So now I work on the wildlife crime and conservation, and dealing with crime level of things, we need to talk about strategies, and we need many experts in the field to make things happen. And I think it's very important to know that this is about teamwork, and every angle is very important, from educators to legislators to lawmakers and law enforcement and all that. And I think it's really important that we leverage on each other's knowledge and expertise to make things happen, so that we don't feel like the burden is on us. And I'm very grateful that we do have a network of experts working together, and we form working groups. We meet regularly, and just to share the things that we all do and progress that we make, and it will help us to reduce the stress by a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, I think collaboration can make a big difference, having a connection. Magaly, yes. Oh, and you are muted. Let's get you. Let me see if I can help you here.
You got me?
Okay, yes.
Okay. Okay, good. Technology. But when a lot of times as an educator, I feel, and I'm sorry for the background noise, I live in Miami, and it's always, there's always something going on over here. When a lot of times when I feel like I'm stuck, or I don't feel like my projects are really doing much or even making much of a difference, I like to remind myself of how far we have come as a society, rather than looking back at or focusing on just how much work we have to do. I like to see the progress that we've made in animal rights and human rights and environmental rights and all of that. I like to remind myself and read uplifting stories, because I know nowadays there's so much saturation when it comes to just news, and a lot of it is not necessarily the most positive of news. I like to really take my time to read some uplifting stories, some stories on especially like animal rescues. Oh my goodness, that to me is like, yes, I'm so happy that that this dog got adopted, or that they saved these farm animals. And I like to see the happy stories, and I like to fill my day with those type of stories. And I know that there are good people out there, and sometimes we start to focus on the negative, and I like to shift that and think of the positive, of just that we as a society are reaching a tipping point. And I like to see my glass half full, not half empty, because that really brings me a lot of joy. And so when I live that type of life, and I shift my life a little bit like that, and I focus a little bit more on the positive, I could be a better educator. I could be a better representation of Magaly, the humane educator, the school teacher. And I know that I'll be making a difference in my classroom. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Magaly. So you just had me thinking about something about the idea of news saturation, hearing these stories that are really emotionally charged and sometimes very negative. I know I personally have reached a point before where if I read one more news story, I'm going to burst into tears. How do you know when to draw the line? And really, where, I suppose my question would be, when do you decide to take a step back? And is taking a step back away from the news okay? Or any of you, how do you feel about that? Diane?
I'm totally okay with taking a step back from the news. I think, the way the media is portrayed now, it's sensationalist and it's negative because that's what gets people charged. In my opinion, I know what's going on out there in terms of the negative stuff. And so if that's all I'm feeding into me, then I'm in that place. Whereas if I can be focused on where I'm going, I think Deb was talking about it early and Elischia about, focusing into the future and knowing where I'm going with what I know is important work, then I can feel that I'm getting somewhere and that I'm making a contribution. But if I'm sitting around listening to stories, I know they're happening. They come up in my Facebook feed. They come up in the news. They just come up. But a lot of times I'm like, click away, click. I don't need to read this. I know what's going on. I just know. So it doesn't help me. So sometimes I watch because it's important, but I don't keep a steady diet of news. No, I don't.
Thank you, Diane. Does anyone else have any thoughts on news? Yes, Elischia.
So I definitely agree. I don't have an issue with stepping away from news, but I wanted to give a slightly different perspective in terms of news for the line of work that I do and a lot of the activists that we support. We have to stay in the news, so to speak. And so what do you do in that instance when you actually have to keep abreast of the news in order to refine your strategies and what you're doing? And the way that I like to look at it is to just take chunks of what you would like to focus on and do them in shifts. So for example, we work a lot with poverty. Poverty is a big field to think about. There's so many aspects and connections to poverty, right? There's so many connections to what we also look at, which is a culture of peace. How do you break that down? You do it according to what is best for you and your group. And I'm speaking in terms of like an activist group working together. So one, you have your people with you. Two, you're breaking it down to bite-sized chunks so that you're not overwhelmed with all of the bad news. And the third thing, which I think is really important, which some people can forget, is while you are having these strategies and when you have a win, no matter how small, you want to immortalize that win so that you can continue to look back on it and also put that out in the atmosphere, because we all need to be reading those stories, having the puppy stories like Magaly talks about, having stories about the environment, about veganism like Brian talked about. Those are the things the way we can help have self-care for each other and for ourselves as individuals.
Yes, Brian.
Like in most things in life, everything in moderation. Pick your sources. I have some preferences, and there are some sources out there that are very negative, and I have no interest in exploring or visiting those. We have friends that have a rule, adults, no devices after 8 p.m. And then they were telling me they watch the news one time at 6 p.m. together. So I'd like to follow their lead at some point when I could practice that. So
Very, very good tip. Absolutely. So often teachers, humane educators, even those of us in animal activism, work independently. We've touched on this a little bit already, but I thought maybe we could dig a little deeper. They may feel like the only one in their institution or in their organization that is working in this area. A lot of times humane educators are working as the only humane educator in their organization. And sometimes as educators and formal educators in the classroom, we may be the only teacher in our institution focusing on humane education. What suggestions does this panel have for ways to combat feelings of isolation? How can we find a sense of community? Deb, yes.
I think a couple of things. Community is something that we can define for ourselves. So does that community have to be another community of educators, or can it be people that we work near who have similar interests or sympathy, or sympathetic tendencies towards the idea of humane education? People that would just support it. I think that can sometimes help. Another thing is, virtual versus in-person communities. I mean, we do have, like what we're doing right now, having this amazing virtual opportunity. I do feel a sense of community here, in a little different way than if we were in the living room together. And then the last piece that, for me, I often have found that works is reminding myself that my community is beyond human. It's human and a whole lot of other beings. And so when I'm out by myself on a trail doing something, I'm actually surrounded by a community. And there have been times that in a moment for that awareness has really helped me not feel isolated. Just realize that it is all a big network.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other thoughts on developing community or different ideas of community? Yes, Brian.
If you feel isolated, and we've all felt that, my advice is to change your behavior. So, for example, when I feel that way, I have a strong network of friends that I've cultivated over the years and sometimes decades. That community is invaluable for me, but that takes work. So every good relationship takes work. And so I dedicate time and energy to fostering those healthy relationships. So, another thing too, change your routine. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of educators in publishing. And I know you're overworked, you're underpaid and undervalued, and are doing amazing work out there. But sometimes it's very isolating. So when you're feeling that, and we've all felt that, mix it up a little bit and do some things that actually give you joy and happiness, and then go back to your routine. So.
Great. Yes, Magaly. I'll take care of you over here. Hold on just one second. There you go.
Well, I am the only, thank you. I am the only humane educator at my school, and at also a lot of outreach sites that I go to. So a lot of times what I do is I like to collaborate with the principal, with the vice principal, with the subject chair, and also keep the lines of communication with the parents so they know what their children are doing when they're with me, because a lot of times I'm not going to brag, but I've gotten some really great reviews from children. They're like, oh my goodness, the humane education class is awesome, or the after school club that we're doing is good. And then I have parents and even teachers ask, what is humane education? What are you what is a humane educator? And I didn't know that even existed. And so rather than feeling very isolated in that sense, what I do is I use that opportunity to share with them exactly what is it that I'm doing. And thus I build a community. They may not necessarily be technically called humane educators or be doing humane education, but they start to implement some of the activities that I'm already doing at some of my classes, or they're continuing to do some of the work that I'm doing. And that to me makes me feel like I am part of the community, and especially with the support of the parents and anyone that just cares for the child themselves. And you have parents, you have guardians, you have other after school or school instructors as well. And that to me just allows me to continue my work beyond just the classroom that I'm in.
That's a creative strategy. It's sort of serving as an influencer. That's wonderful, Magaly. Thank you. Great. Any other thoughts? Yes, Elischia.
I just wanted to really give 2 thumbs up to what Deb was saying about community is not just the human interaction. And one of the ways I think that we can piggyback off of that as humane educators, but also just as world citizens, is to build up our environment, our earth community. I'm trying to say it in the right way, where we're building up our physical spaces. So a lot of things that people are doing now revolves around the topic of sustainable development. And that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but starting off small, making your spaces more green, more conducive to recycling, caring for animals, whether they be on the street or in your home. Just those little changes that over time you're going to want to do more to challenge yourself, because you're going to get so used to that. And that's what we want to see as humane educators anyway, is starting to see that perception shift that then translates into behavioral change.
Great. Yes, Rosanna.
I think I like to share the benefits of having a community of like-minded people to be around you. Like in my foundation, we work on environmental issues. So sitting together with me in the office are people who work on clean air, people who work on water issues. Like seriously, we have a water problem in China. The water is just being so polluted, and I work on wildlife, and we are so supportive of each other's work. And you know, sometimes we just sit together and just share the challenges we all face, and you can find similarities, and you can find different areas of difficulties we face with, but we're supportive of each other. So I hope that all of us can look around for people who are doing similar work and just support each other. It helps so much that you don't fall into a dark hole. You know, there are other people out there working on the same changes that you're looking for.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, Deb.
One comment that kind of piggybacks on that, but also brings in a little bit of our compassion fatigue discussion from a few minutes ago. I think that it's also important for us to know that it's okay to ask for help and to step even farther, because this is the work that we're talking about here. This is big time. It's life or death. It's the stuff that rocks us to our core, and nobody gets into humane education to be famous or become a millionaire. Everybody's there because their heart is there. And so I think that that's the other piece is we have our community, and do we need to lean into our community? Does that mean we need to get professional help for challenges we're facing, or does that mean we need to pull back and focus differently for a little while? And knowing that doing that doesn't mean that we aren't still doing this work that's in our heart. It actually might be what allows us to keep doing this work that's in our heart.
Great point. You know, I think it requires some degree of vulnerability, and that can be challenging sometimes for individuals to feel comfortable, and for space to be created to allow for vulnerability and trust among individuals, even in our own sector. That can be a challenge. Sarah, did you have something to contribute?
I just wanted to say something really quickly, that this whole conversation, then something we all talked about yesterday a little bit in Tea and Teaching, is also really, I think, I know I have suffered from this, where I feel like I'm in a room of people who I'm to make it myself sound like a terrible person, but like, oh, they just don't get it. And I went through that phase of my life, and now I regret being almost immature in my thinking that they just don't get it. I think a lot of people actually do. And sometimes it takes the bravery to start those conversations. People don't want to see cruelty. They don't want to see suffering. And so I think through some modeling and providing people the opportunity to ask us why we're behaving the way that we are and whatnot, that can open and create community even in spaces where we think people aren't with us. Maybe they are and they're too afraid to start having those conversations, or don't know who to talk to about the things that they're seeing and feeling, because nobody today, unfortunately, can escape the fact that our environment is deteriorating, that we are forcing people into slavery, that we're in an extinction crisis. Everybody does know these things, but they feel so incapacitated that they don't start those conversations. So I say that just to say, let's try having those conversations, maybe even in spaces where it doesn't feel like we might be well received, because oftentimes we might be surprised, and that'd be great. So I just wanted to say, let's try. So.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, Diane.
I couldn't point to when I read it. The past couple months, Harvard Business Review had a daily thing on a little blurb really about this, about approaching people, your colleagues, and asking them, are you okay? How's everything going? Just checking in with the people that you're with. And I think this goes back to that one of the questions earlier, but when we're isolated, then who's checking on us and who are we checking on? So I think it's critical for us to be connected, even if it's virtually, with one another, because there's still a connection there, and we know what's going on, even just professionally, and we can form relationships with each other this way, so that we can be checking up on people and being checked up on as well.
Very good points. So I'd like for us to transition to mindfulness. The concept of mindfulness is obviously growing in popularity. I'm seeing it everywhere. And this question that we received comes from a classroom teacher. The question is, mindfulness, I have limited time to do mindfulness in my classroom. What suggestions do you have for ways I can build it either into my daily routine or into my routine with students? Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Yes, Deb.
Yeah, I actually love this question because I completely resonate with it. You know, the train can start going really fast. And one of the things I love is mindfulness spots or triggers or moments. Some things I've heard people do is they send an email, hit send, take a minute, take a breath, just check in where they are, land there for a second. Or a group with kids, after an assignment is finished and everyone's transitioning, to just take that second and not making it a big one more huge thing on the list, but rather weaving it throughout. Personally, one of my favorite places to do it is when I'm walking my dogs, which I definitely need to do, and do that all the time. It's one of the times that it's almost like a forced opportunity, because I'm going to walk them because they need that. And so I take that for myself too. Looking for the little triggers or the little moments.
Yes, that's great. Yes, Magaly. I'll get you. I've got you. There we go.
Well, as a classroom teacher, what I would advise my fellow colleague would be to, if she ever has an opportunity, to take the class outside. I love doing outdoor activities with my students, and especially I love having them come into a circle. And we can start some breathing exercises, or we just do some just more so group type of exercises, even if it's for just 10 or 15 minutes. Just being outside, just getting some fresh air. And I think a lot of that also allows them to enhance their different senses. What do we hear? What do we smell? What can we touch? And if we can go barefoot, perfect. If there's like really great grass, I just tell them, yeah, go ahead, remove your shoes, go walk outside. I'm gonna do the same. We'll be under some trees, and then we have a lot of iguanas actually in our school grounds, and many times some like large iguanas would come by, and I'm like, don't say anything, just observe. And they're like, wow, I'd never seen them so big. And I'm like, yes, there's not just little lizards. I mean, these are huge iguanas. And there's these magical moments that take place when you are able to go outside and take your students out there with you, that you're not able to duplicate the same thing in the classroom. If I'm going to talk about the environment, for example, I'm going to try to take them outside. If I want to talk to them anything nature-based or biology-based or any of those subjects, even when it comes to people, I want them to go outside and experience it for themselves. So I hope that was able to help out the teacher that had the question.
That's great. Thank you, Magaly. Yes, Brian.
You know, I'm thinking about this as a student and also spending a lot of time around educators, as I said before. And as a student, a young student or in college, we all experience or have those teachers that we remember for the rest of our lives, that make an impact on us for the rest of our lives. I could think of 3 of them that I still am thinking about, and actually 2 I still am in contact with. They've become friends. My point is, if somebody would have taught mindfulness to me in a classroom at any time, I would remember that for the rest of my life. And I would bring that tool with me. So however you do it, I think that's beautiful, do it, but make it repetitive so it becomes a learned habit. And so they could take that with them for the rest of their lives. So those are my thoughts.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, Deb.
Just one last little tidbit. I think the other thing that's important is that mindfulness, while there is certainly a definition and all that, it still is very subjective. And so I think when we're working with students and with people, it's also leaving space for what does that mean for that person? You know, is it a how I feel check-in? Is it a look around me and locate myself in the space and use my senses? You know, Magaly was mentioning it. What is that mindfulness for somebody? I think that also sets people up for success, because if it's one way that we're taught and that doesn't quite work for us, then it's easy to go, oh, wow, I'm not mindful. I can't even think that way, you know, as opposed to here's a buffet, and there may be even other things that each student can bring to that buffet. And then it can be kind of a co-created and repetitive, as Brian was saying.
That's great. Yes, we've got a great conversation happening over here in the comments. One that I wanted to point out comes from Regina. She says, you could close each class with a 30-second to 1-minute breathing exercise before they leave your room. That gets it started, that plants the seed. So true. It's a great suggestion for our classroom teacher wanting to build it into the daily routine. Just squeeze it in. That's a great bit of information. And Ellen earlier shared that she really loves the reminder to celebrate the successes, the wins, the small successes. Those are important for us to keep in mind and curb our compassion fatigue. So another question I just wanted to bring up is work-life balance. This question comes from an informal educator. This person asked, work-life balance is a big issue in education, especially here in the humane field. How can we find balance? What are some ideas we can use to make sure we prioritize ourselves? Does the panel have any thoughts on the concept of prioritizing ourselves, which is not easy for us to do in the humane field? Yes, Diane.
I can't remember the exact title of the book. I read part of it recently. I'll look it up and I'll post it in the chat in a minute. But the idea was that it's really hard to actually be balanced, and that we actually have to be out of balance in one area to really focus on that, and be really not focusing on the other one for the moment. And then you got to swing the pendulum the other way. And going back to the mindfulness, that you're really focused with what you're doing in the moment. Because I remember when my kids were little and I was trying to get my work going, and I was very upset because when I would be with my kids, I felt like I'm not getting my work done. And if I was doing my work, I felt like I was being a horrible mother. And somebody said to me, actually, one of the educators at the school said to me, "You're trying to win?" Like, what are you doing? You're trying to win? And that really stuck with me, that, wow, like, just be really present with my kids when I'm with my kids. And then when I'm doing my work, just really do my work. And that's the best that anybody can ask, right? And I know that doesn't mean that the inner turmoil isn't going on at the same time, but we're doing the best that we can at the moment with what we have.
Yes, Deb.
I think another piece, I love what Diane said about how balance is kind of one of those far-reaching goals, and what does it even mean? One thing that I like to think of is, what are the personal rhythms that we all live in? Are there periods of time where maybe for a few weeks we're really focused in one way and not the others? Maybe it's not every day in a perfect balance. Maybe it's more like seasons and times within our lives that kind of ebb and flow to different places where our focus needs to be put and our attention needs to be emphasized.
That's great. Yes, Elischia.
I'm going to take a little bit of a slightly different view. I actually agree a lot with what Diane and Deb has put forward, but I think that comes with the caveat of us being humans trying to rationalize balance. Nature doesn't have a problem knowing how to balance, neither does our innate biology. We have equilibrium in our system that is always balancing out. So I tend to think of it as listening more, learning how to listen more to your body. Your body will tell you what rhythm you need to go in. And then eventually what you can develop with that mindfulness practice is to then be in sync with the rest of the environment around you. Or if you need to, how to change the environment around you by being steadfast in yourself. Sometimes it is necessary that you have to be in the middle of chaos, especially if you're an activist doing certain things. You kind of have to be in the midst of chaos, but you cannot allow that chaos to be internalized. And so that becomes something that you become a shifter in your immediate environment. And it sounds a bit, pie in the sky a little bit, but if we're talking about being mindful and understanding rhythms, it's very important for us to just kind of stop, and the body will definitely tell you what it needs. It cues us when we're thirsty, when we're hungry, so on and so forth, when it's too hot, too cold. Start to recognize those things so you can catch yourself before you get to the extreme versions of those needs being demanded.
Great point. Yes, Rosanna, and then Brian.
Thank you, Elischia, for pointing that out about balance. We really kind of make it up to think that we need to balance things, but I think the important thing is to listen to yourself, your inner self, your inner voice, what you are telling yourself what you want to do. And I keep my life very simple. And in that sense, it's very easy. It's easier to make my choice. And I find that a lot of times I'm sitting, even when I'm at home, I'm sitting at my desk working. And it's because I love the kind of work I do. And I do actually look forward to sitting on my desk and do my work. And sometimes, there are other voices and tell you, oh, go do this, go do that. But I choose to stay home and do what I do. And it's because my inner self tells me that this is you and what you do are so meaningful. So there are a lot of distraction out there, and you just have to funnel through what your priorities are. And then I just sort out the distraction, and it's so much easier for you to handle your life. I don't know if I've expressed it correctly.
No, that was a beautiful way to describe it. And I think we all can very much relate to what you've said. Brian, would you like to contribute?
No, I echo everything that all our panelists have said, but I don't know if anybody else that's listening or on this panel has this problem that I have, but sometimes sleep is an issue. And we had the privilege of seeing Bobby McFerrin at Omega. He does Circle Songs, which and he's a national treasure of vocalist and musician, composer, and for those who aren't familiar with him, and he was talking to a large group of singers, and probably about 300 people, and giving they were asking him questions, and he said, one of the most important things that I do is get a good night's sleep. But he plans for that, and he went through his routine, how he, prepared himself and had certain slippers that he wore, but then took a half hour before to prepare for sleep, and that has always resonated with me. And I know sleep is a big issue in our society, but I know a foundation for me to have balance starts with a good night's sleep.
Diane, would you like to follow up to that?
Yeah, and I'll just tag on you. We were talking about teaching mindfulness and whatnot, and also Elischia was really talking about, being able to listen to ourselves. And I also think having some sort of mindfulness practice of your own, whether it's out in nature, whether it's meditating. And I know it's really hard finding the time, but I also know that the more time that I take to get quiet, actually the more I get done. So it's counterintuitive, but it's so important because we can't help anybody else. It's like that oxygen mask idea. We can't help anybody else if we're not taking care of ourselves first. And how can we be teaching mindfulness in the classroom unless we're being mindful first ourselves? So I think that's really key and critical, whether it is being, officially meditating or taking a walk in nature or walking your dogs, whatever that is for you, find whatever that is and do it. And, Megan, you're such a wonderful example. You had an amazing post a few weeks back. You've been baking and cooking, and you were having like a tea party with your dog. I don't remember what the whole thing was, but it was so great. And you were such an example. Like, we know how hard you work. You're like the hardest working out. You're amazing. And yet you're setting this example of, but I'm taking time out to do this, and sharing it, the beauty of it with everybody. So you're a true example of that. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Diane. I find that sharing what I am trying to do in my own life holds me a little bit accountable to it. And so I find that I have more follow through and more commitment to finding joy in my life and making space for mindfulness and self-care if I if I share that information with others and they're counting on me to follow through. So yeah, we did have a question come in our last few minutes here. And I do just want to remind the panelists to please, if you have any resources at all to share, even productivity. I keep thinking about like ways that we can remind ourselves to practice mindfulness and take time away, whatever those triggers might be, or time periods of the day that work really well for you. Share those in the chat with our attendees. And I ask our attendees to do the same. If you have recommendations for practicing self-care, making time and prioritizing ourselves, please add those into the chat. I will be compiling all of that information and sharing it after this event today. This last question is, if you're already out of balance in terms of work and life, and you are suffering from burnout, what are some strategies for recovery? How do you get back? Part of the challenge here is that we're talking a lot about amazing topics and great strategies for making change and improving the quality of our lives. But when you've crossed over into a place of true burnout, sometimes it's not always easy to say, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to go to bed earlier, or I'm going to make this space in my day to do a body scan or visualization or mindfulness activity. How do we bounce back? How do we find ways to recover? Deb?
One of the first things that I do, and it's kind of a practice, for lack of a better word, is if I start to feel like I'm hitting burnout and I'm hitting overwhelm, is I stop and say, okay, what's on my plate? How much of this do I need to be the specific person attending to? and how much of this do I deeply love and believe in and care about and want to happen, maybe isn't the place that is I can more uniquely contribute. And maybe there's another person or other group of people, you know, that I can say, okay, I really hope that that takes place. I love that. I have to focus in this one or two these areas over here. Really a hard question, I think, for probably a lot of people interested in humane education, because, you know, our hearts can pull us in so many directions. And this is something I'm still learning for myself, is what is that? How do I identify where do I need to be involved, and where can I put my love and energy and support and step back?
That's a powerful point. Elischia, yes.
I think a lot about this in terms of the activist perspective. So I know we're talking a lot about teachers and classrooms, but sometimes activists that are in the throes of some really heavy topics experience both burnout and also experiencing deep trauma simultaneously. And it's very difficult to pull yourself out. I would argue that you don't actually pull yourself out, that it takes a number of factors together that collectively help you out of it. But one of the things that I tell people when I see other people going through it, or they share it with me, and when I myself have gone through it, is the first thing I say is stop. I don't care what's going on, provided I have to put the little caveats around it, because this is also provided that you're in an actual safe zone, that you're not physically going to be harmed in the middle of stopping, but physically stopping, taking a breath, and then piecing things one by one, what your thoughts are. Sometimes you have to check out to check back in. And sometimes you don't actually have a timestamp on when that's going to be. And that's where it becomes important that our support systems, whether it be our immediate support systems or just our human family that just notices something is off with this particular person, that's where we have to get to a place where, just as a human being, we reach out to other people saying, hey, I'm noticing you're struggling. Is there anything that I can do? And people normally will just tell you, even if they don't think there's anything that you can do, and you can take it from there. So it doesn't sound like a catch-all solution. This kind of thing never is, but that's one place where you can start.
That's fantastic. Yes, and I just want to share really quickly, Zoe Weil, who was in attendance today, had a suggestion, making a commitment to daily exercise. I can attest to that. Makes a huge difference, especially when it comes to routine sleep. For me, that if I don't exercise, I usually have less effective sleep. And also, she suggested if you're able to get outside for an hour a day in a natural setting. It's not always possible for everyone. She even mentions that here, but an hour a day devoted to natural, outdoor activity can really help put you on track, happier, healthier, ready to do your good work. So those are great suggestions. Thank you, Zoe. Okay, yes, Sarah.
So I wanted to sort of add on to something Brian said earlier about his gratitude journal, and really being careful to pay attention to that each day. And that's, I don't have a journal, I admit, but when I'm really starting to spin out of being able to moderate my own emotions about some of the issues that we deal with, I have to think about and really sit down and take that deep breath and focus on the good things, not just in my life, because I think that's something we have a hard time prioritizing because we're always thinking about others around us. But that, think about that dog you rescued or adopted. Think about that great connection you had with a child. Think about those great things and the wonderful progress that you have seen in your life, and almost indulge yourself, because that sometimes I think we beat ourselves up so much that it does start to feel like, oh, I'm just indulging myself, and that self-care thing, I don't need that, I'm too strong, I can power through this. But then of course that we pay for that in the end. So in indulging in being grateful for the little things that we have been able to make a positive impact on is I think really important.
Absolutely. Diane, did you have something?
Just really something quick that, you know, if you have a pet, pet your pet, you know, it brings down our blood pressure. I mean, that's kind of what we're all teaching anyway in certain one way, shape, manner, or form. And we know how important it is for our health. It's good for our health to play with your dog or play with your cat or whatever animal you have, or visit someone, you know, it just makes a difference. So just really quick.
Beautiful, beautiful suggestion. I agree completely. Magaly, yes. I've got you. Hold on one second. Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah, I am.
Hey.
Well, I just wanted to share something that happened to me a while back as a humane educator, because I did experience burnout. Here in Florida, we have SeaWorld, and we also have the Miami Sea Aquarium. And one of my lessons was that I was speaking about orcas. And I had to give this presentation numerous times to various different classrooms. Not only did I acquire material from PETA, but I also was able to obtain some videos on YouTube. And then I had to show Blackfish, the documentary Blackfish, a few times. And it hit me. One night I got home and I broke down in tears. And I think I was watching something else, and I realized that I was experiencing fatigue, and it was compassion fatigue. I felt like I just didn't know what to do to save these orcas. I felt like I'm just one person, and my students are just a group of students, and they're going to write a letter, and maybe they're not even going to be heard. And I didn't know what to do anymore. I said, why am I doing this work? And I kept asking those questions to myself. Am I treating myself kindly? Do I have to be there present every single moment and show these documentaries or show these images that break my heart? And mind you, these are students that I may not necessarily have was working with on a continuous basis. And so for a lot of them, this was their first time in seeing some of this material. But for me, it was the maybe 15th or 20th time seeing the same thing. And I was getting depressed. That was happening to me. So what I had to do is I had to take a step back from humane education. I did. I took time off from that. And the recovery, I believe even Elischia mentioned it, sometimes you have to stop and just allow it to pretty much flow and not necessarily give it a time frame as to when you have to go back into that type of work. And that's what I did for myself. I started dedicating myself to more meditation, more yoga, going out dancing, or just, putting on Pandora and just, kicking it, hanging out with family and friends, having a glass of wine, that doesn't hurt. Doing things for myself and falling in love with humane education again. And it happened. I started doing some more animal rescue work and saying, okay, I might not get back into teaching just yet, but just being able to do more hands-on work with others that were not necessarily children, but just more with animals and doing things with the environment and going in the beach cleanups and not being the coordinator. See, I was always the person that was in charge of these projects, being the leader of the classroom. And I just said to myself, Maggie, you just need to be a participant for now. And you need to do that for yourself, for your own sake. And that just made me a stronger educator and just a stronger woman, because I knew where my strengths and my weaknesses were. And I said, okay, you are overly sensitive, so we have to find that balance. And once I did, I was able to just be a better educator. And I went back into teaching, and then I started Everyday Humane, and now I'm here, right?
Yes, sometimes those breaks are much needed and very much deserved, and can refresh and recharge you to return to your very important work.
Very important.
We are officially over our hour, and I want to be respectful to our attendees' time and, of course, our panelists' time as well. So I'd like to go ahead and wrap up here. Just share a quick reminder that participants who attend all 3 live panel discussions during the Humane Summit are invited to download a certificate of completion with 3 contact hours documented. The certificate is available at no cost and will be available to download in the summit shortly. And we do recommend checking with your state regulatory agency to determine if the panel discussions and certificate will meet the continuing education requirements for your profession. I want to extend a massive thank you to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. It was just a tremendous honor to spend this hour with you, learning from you, learning from our amazing attendees. This is such a rewarding experience. I'd also love to thank our participants for joining the Wind Down with Wellness panel discussion. And hopefully everyone will make time to view our previous panel discussions and our many speaker sessions that are now all available in the summit and available for you to watch at no cost. I sincerely appreciate your time and energy today, and just wish you all well wishes, and please do keep in touch with us moving forward. Let us know how we can help. Let's all stay in touch and support each other. Feel free to unmute yourselves now if you would like to.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Great conversation
you.
on the side, too.
Thank you, everybody.
Great to
Thank
see
you.
you all.
Bye.
Bye.